In today's episode, flower alchemist Katie Hess enlightens us to the healing power of flower elixirs. Learn how this subtle energetic therapy can act as a powerful healer and guide in your personal growth. Flower elixirs help you to discover your biggest lessons. They shine a light on your greatest strengths and bring awareness to your unique individual gifts that will support you in reaching your true potential. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for tuning in. In today's episode, I get the chance to talk with Katie Hess. And Katie is a really beautiful soul. I mean, she's here doing exactly what she was put here to do, and that is essentially bringing nature and the power of nature into your home so that you can get all the benefits of it. Katie is a flower alchemist, and what that literally means is that she has developed a way of extracting literally what would be the life force or the life energy from a flower and bottling it so that you can take it home and get all of the benefits from it. And in today's episode, we talk about so many different things related to the healing power of nature and specifically the healing power of flowers. A lot of times when we think about plants, we're usually thinking about things like herbs and herbal medicines and even aromatherapy, but we really get into this other area of flower elixirs, and it's a very different piece of the overall health puzzle. These flower elixirs primarily work at this vital body level of when we look at health. And vital body level is the world of sort of emotions. And what these flower elixirs are able to do is they have this subtle power of being able to shine lights on our strengths and our gifts. They are able to make subtle changes in the way that we see life and in our perspectives. And so they almost allow us to access that innate wisdom that we all have that's inside of us, and it allows us to access it so that we can bring it forth and add it to our life in a way that starts to bring more meaning and more growth and more expansion to our lives. And this is a really fun interview, and I learned so much talking with her, and I'm excited to work with Katie in the future. I've actually been using a lot of her flower essence products over the last while, and they really are phenomenal. What you'll learn is that every flower has a different focus, just much the same as like we do with plants when we think about herbs and using them for cardiovascular system or using them for pulmonary system or using them for gastrointestinal or whatever we want to do with the herbs. The flowers have a similar impact, except that the impact is a little bit more on the mental emotional level, which then trickles down and creates concrete changes in the physical body. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I had a lot of fun interviewing Katie. Now, before we get into the show, I want to thank our sponsor, Organifi. And if you have not had a chance to try their green juice, you need to go check it out. The Organifi green juice is by far my favorite green juice that I have ever tried. And I've tried a lot of them over the years. Most of the time, I think they taste kind of like grass. They don't taste all that good, or they have too strong of either that stevia flavor or something that I don't like if it gets to be too much. But the Organifi green juice is such a good one, and it has become a daily part of my routine. And outside of having a number of potent superfoods to get mass amounts of antioxidants and polyphenols and all of these powerful properties that we want from all of these organic fruits and vegetables, one of the key things that I think is most important right at the moment is the fact that the Organifi green juice is really tailored to help us with stress. Now, 55% of Americans are overstressed. And my guess is that right now, I bet you that number is probably topping up closer to about 85 or 90% given the global climate at the moment. And when you get stressed, you got to remember things happen. When you start to get stressed, you deplete your energy. You start to get cravings for unhealthy foods, and you generally reduce the quality of your life. Your happiness and your joy just start to plummet. And this can be worked with from a biochemical level when you start to incorporate some of these adaptogenic foods. The green juice is targeted to assist with decreasing stress because of some of the adaptogenic herbs in it, particularly ashwagandha. In the green juice, you've got the moringa, which has got loaded with essential amino acids and antioxidants. It's got those dark green nutrient-based chlorella and spirulina, which are super important for antioxidants. They also help to bind heavy metals and detoxify the body. You've got wheatgrass, which has been used for decades for health benefits. It's got matcha green tea, beetroot, so many different things, and they have a way of blending it together that actually tastes good. So if you haven't had a chance to get it yet, go try it. I am pretty sure it will be the best tasting one that you have tried before. If you haven't had a chance to try it yet, check out Organifi at www.organifi.com/inspire for 15% off your order. That's www.organifi.com/inspire for 15% off your total order.
Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. Today's guest is Katie Hess. Katie is a flower alchemist, author of FlowerEvolution, and founder of Lotus Way, one of the world's leading floral apothecaries. With her signature elixirs featured on O, the Oprah magazine, the New York Times, and the LA Times, her flower-powered community is thriving. Katie teaches mindful awareness practices at Flower Lounge events around the world and hosts a Flower Lounge podcast with listeners in over 75 countries. She's founder of the Self-Arising Nature Center in Phoenix, Arizona, a center for flower essence education, experiences, and practitioner training. Katie, what a great pleasure to have you on the show today.
Oh my God, it's such a joy to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I came across your work a little while back, and people haven't checked out your podcast, check it out. You've got some great guests. You've got some really great in-depth conversations. I really enjoyed listening to a bunch of them. One of them particularly I want to talk about towards the end here because I think it's really, really timely and really important, but I'll save that for a little bit towards the end. Katie, one of the things I really loved about going through your work is that I feel like you've done so much with trying to bring awareness to people about just how actually powerful nature is. And you found this really beautiful way of trying to bring nature to people when they can't always get out and enjoy nature as much as maybe they'd like to. Now, one thing that you talked about in your book that I thought was really great was that you said that your life work has been devoted to capturing what can be felt, not seen. I love that because I think when people think about nature, it's almost like the first things we think about are what we see is so beautiful, or what we hear sounds so soothing, or what we smell is so aromatic. But I think the felt part of it is almost a secondary thing, and that's become your primary. So I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about what you mean by that, and then how that did become your life work.
Yeah, what a great question. So, yeah, I mean, like you said, most people will look at flowers and just be kind of like arrested by their beauty. And in some ways, that's perfect, right? Because we don't really need to say anything. Like some of the best experiences are those that can't be seen. Like, where's love? Like, how do you see love? Right? Like, love is such a massive, like, tidal wave concept, and you can't actually see it, but we believe in love. And so flowers have the same capacity. They express their so-called love in slightly different ways, but it's like this energetic tidal wave of whatever their particular quality is. So we as human beings, we're just naturally, if we have an affinity, right? We're just drawn to those flowers that will awaken and magnify our strengths and hidden potential, and also give us a chance to really look at what are the things that are tripping us up? What are our self-limiting patterns? Where do we get bogged down? And I think that's one of their greatest superpowers, is that in the gentlest, sweetest, kindest way, they can show us things about ourselves that we haven't been able to see, like blind spots. And people might say like, how the heck do flowers do that, right? Because they're just like these quiet things growing that we think are beautiful, but there's actually a lot going on. And when you think like, in terms of like the earth and how old it is, it's 4.5 billion years old. And so, even just like looking at your cell phone, like people really ask, like, how the heck does my cell phone work? Like,
Hmm.
how does it actually work, right? Like we never question those things because we just like pick up the phone and call someone in Japan. But when you reflect on the fact that there are like countless invisible waves around us, right? If someone would have told you, like, Jason, when you're a kid, or when you were a kid, when you're older, you're going to have this box in your pocket that's going to emit these invisible waves, woohoo, right? That will carry messages and images and videos and music and poetry. And you could reach someone in China in like 2 seconds. Like you would have never believed that as a kid, or,
Hmm.
you wanted to believe it, right? So yeah, we have this technology, and also a part of us knows that if the earth is so old, it's always had this technology all along, right before humans. And so in a sense, I like to think of it as floral Wi-Fi. So when you're walking out of the forest and you're with the trees and you're with the flowers, they're each emitting a specific type of, you can call it wavelength, or you could call it like quality or message that, when you come into contact with it, as we are also these beings of complex energy systems, it it tunes us up. It puts us back into our natural balance. And we know that when we're fully balanced, we are loving, we're generous, we're kind. I mean, look at the purity of a child, right?
Hmm.
And we just get thrown out of whack from all of these invisible waves and not eating at the right time and crazy, busy modern lifestyle. And so flowers, in summary, are this way to reflect back to us and nudge us back into our own beautiful balance.
I love it. I did a episode a while back on the importance and the power of nature immersion. And it was funny, like even some of the things that I talked about as I was going through your book, I was like, oh my gosh, we're using like some of the same references and what we're talking about. And bottom line is like again, it's like you can understand it from an intellectual point, but it's like it's such an experiential thing. Like if you just go out and immerse yourself in it, you experience it and you start to see how you naturally interact with people differently, how you soften in certain ways. Your nervous system relaxes, you naturally start to feel more interconnected if you stay long enough. And I remember like some of the native traditions, it was like from a healing perspective, they would try lots of different things, and at some point it's like if you didn't heal, they would literally leave you in nature and let nature literally be the healing. So it's like you would go out, you'd fast, you just stay in nature, and it would basically heal you or not, sort of thing. It was like just go spend time and let Mother Nature take care of you. So, and you had mentioned about like a flower Wi-Fi, and it makes me think when I think you even mentioned in your book where you talked about the old shamans, and they actually intuited, they spoke with the flowers, they spoke with the herbs and with the roots and with the plants, and the plants literally told them what they were to be used for.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, and that's I mean, that's essentially, that's kind of the strange part of the work that I do, is that I'm just employing those ancient techniques of speaking directly to, so many things. One of my dearest spiritual teachers said to me this year, educated people are at a disadvantage because they believe everything they read. And some of the best things we can't read in books, right? It's just like go outside into the woods and ask the trees. And there's this really interesting thing that scientists actually figured out. I read this in a book by Stephen Herod Buhner. He's an incredible herbalist. You may have heard of him. And they found that if you uh, like ask a particular plant to help you with an issue, they literally see the chemical compounds in that plant changing, so that within the next 24 hours its makeup is different. So there is this like very alive, intelligent, incredibly intelligent quality of plants that responds to us. And that only makes sense, right, that the shamans would leave people out in the middle of nowhere because you're taken care of.
Well, and even when you mention that, it's really neat because you think about it with kids and say with mother's breast milk. if the child is experiencing any kind of illness, when the child actually suckles on the breast and gets the breast milk, the composition of the breast milk changes. Different sort of immunoglobulins and whatnot are tailored for that child on what they require at that point in time. And it kind of makes sense that Mother Nature would do something very similar to that in its own way, but through plants as opposed to breast milk. So it just kind of dawned on me when you were saying that I'm like, oh my gosh, like that it really makes a lot of intuitive sense that it would work like that. And I mean, it's why I always find it so fascinating, the interaction between child and mother and everything that goes on with that. But that's our relationship with Mother Earth in a lot of ways.
And in a sense, you're saying that both humans and plants are like living apothecaries.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I know from a naturopathic perspective, we really do believe that nature has pretty much all the answers. We just have to listen to them and we have to be able to reconnect with it again. Like I think we did way back when at one point, and then it's just been a long series of disconnection. But, and you were talking about, it was interesting when you were talking about even intellectual. I totally understand that. And it ties in with one of the questions I have for you kind of a little bit down the road here, but it is around the idea of how do we really know what we know, and that plants can even play a role with that. But we'll talk about that one in a little bit because I want to gradually come to that. Now, how did you though become so fascinated by it? So what was your journey that brought you to fall in love with flowers particularly, as opposed to even say like herbs or leaves or stems or that sort of piece of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I always loved flowers when I was a kid. I was an only child, so I spent a lot of time in the forest, but I probably would have never guessed that I'd be working with them. It wasn't until I graduated college that I was really like looking for what would be the vehicle that I could help people reach their full potential. Like I was astute enough to look around and say like, okay, one thing I'm sure about from my own experience is that we haven't attained our full potential. Like, each one of us as individuals, and I usually always ask people in classes, like, okay, raise your hand if you have totally tapped out your potential. Like you've maxed out, you're the best you're ever going to be. Right? Innately, we know that we still have more potential, even if we don't know what it is. There's this sense that there's more. And so at the time, I was living outside the country, traveling in many different places, and I stumbled on an expert in flower essences who was from Madrid, Spain. And so two things happened. One is he sort of turned me on to the world of flowers because he was saying like every flower has a particular quality. Like this flower makes you sleepy, this one makes you happy, and I just thought that's fascinating. Like we need that kind of support. And then the other thing he said that really grabbed me was he said that his belief was that if we could get 3% of the world's population actively working with flower essences, it would radically change the future of our planet. He never got really specific about what those changes are, but it would be like very positive. And I thought, oh, wow. For so many of us who have this deep, desire since childhood to benefit in some way, to know that we don't have to have 100%, that just 3% is enough force and magnitude to affect and impact the entire planet was like, okay, I can do that. I can go back to the United States and I can bring flower essences to more of a mainstream understanding. Of course, when I got back to the US, it was like, oh man, people thought I was Fruit Loops, right? That was like the year 2001, and people were, thought I was crazy. Yoga wasn't cool, meditation wasn't
Yeah.
cool yet. But what really solidified it was when I got back to the States, I looked at how many adults and children were being put on pharmaceuticals for mood. And I looked at, 7 million kids being on ADHD medications. And I thought, how on earth have we gotten this far in our country? And I'm sure Canada's similar.
Yep.
And many places around the world are similar. How have we gotten this far down this road when we have something that is equally, if not more effective, with no side effects and totally safe and gentle? How is that possible? And so I just kind of like, it set this fire inside of me to really, for the rest of my life, dedicate the rest of my life until I die to let as many people know about this as possible.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. And I think about that too because it's like our youth is such a telltale sign for where things are moving, and it's a really I was having this conversation with someone just a little while ago, particularly around ADHD, and it's this blend. We're definitely in a culture where it's like we need to fix something, right? So it's like we're always trying to figure out, well, how do we fix them, as opposed to what my belief is. And a lot of times there's a combination. Sometimes it's often more like, what do we kind of need to pull out that's getting in the way, right, of that natural life force to do what it's designed to do. And I also think, and this has been a really big lesson for me with my stepson who's 16 now, and I really do believe for that a lot of times, like kids that are coming in, they fight against what no longer works. And in a big piece is not to try and fix it so that they can fit in. Part of that, I think they're born into a world that doesn't work for them because they're part of the process on creating a new world that's supposed to look different. So then I think, well, okay, how do we not fix them? How do we support that whole process? What does that look like? What does that look like from a parent perspective? How do you support that process? How do I support their body from a nutritional perspective and from an energetic perspective with all of those things so that they can, like you said, sort of reach that true potential that I think is within all of us, but it's not to necessarily just become okay with an environment that maybe isn't actually okay anymore.
My God, I've just seen that personally. I sort of unofficially, informally adopted an 8-year-old child recently, and
Wonderful.
it's so incredible. And I could see that online learning, being on the iPad, being on the iPhone was literally like destroying his body. It was like his electrical system was going crazy. And just in the last week, we figured out, and I used to think, oh, worksheets, like horror. But we pulled him out of all online schooling and have this, books for him to write in, and it's like amazing. He's totally self-led, self-motivated, gets everything done, super confident, and he's engaged. He's moving. Like this whole idea of, all of us just being like stuck on the screens for so many hours a day, I think is not realistic. And going back into nature, you see that actually kids kind of know how to learn on their own if you just get out of the way, like you said.
Hmm. Well, and that's really neat. We're on Vancouver Island, and there's actually a number of schools that are like outdoor schools. So it's like the vast majority of time is spent outside. And even like the learning environment, there's gardens and you're outside and you're actually incorporating this kind of stuff. To me, it's like that's so important. It's also it's tangible, and they're experience it as opposed to just sort of a head heavy, brain heavy kind of learning and rote memory. Like they're experiencing it with everything they're doing. And the natural environment that we know, nature constantly just down regulates that stress system in the body, so it allows the brain to naturally relax, and which sometimes on this, well, which happens on a screen. I get it, and I'm not totally bastardizing screens and everything, because I use one for work and they're great,
Right.
but there's a balance between all of them. And I know firsthand, I see with my kids, all of them. I've got a 3 and a 4-year-old girl, and I've got a stepson who's 16. It's like if they spend very much time at all on the screen, like their energy system totally different, especially once you turn it off, right? Now, when they're on it, they might look like they're all relaxed, but that's not what's going on. And you notice that as soon as you try and take it away. But I take them out to the park or by the ocean or in the forest when we walk around, and they are naturally mesmerized by nature. They're looking at every little thing, every little insect and the flowers and the rocks. And it's like, and you see their whole nervous system just settle right down. They play really gently with each other, whereas sometimes the other times it gets to be more rough play and stuff. So I think overall it's just such a profound difference when you can incorporate nature. Now, you had mentioned something that I thought was really important too. I think it was Dr. Pedro, your mentor, that talked about the 3%. I really love that because I'm a big proponent on that too. And I love that it doesn't have to be a massive population. I remember one of my main teachers, Dr. David Hawkins, would talk about that basically as shifts in consciousness, you can have higher shifts in consciousness, which carry sometimes millions of people with you. So, and it's not a better than or worse than, it's just a nature of of almost the perspective that you have when you're at different levels of consciousness. And so if you can have, and I generally think like being immersed in nature and incorporating some of the energetics of nature assist with that shift in consciousness. And when that happens, you don't need the entire population, because the reality is some people just aren't going to be able to have access to it. But if you can get a certain percentage, and then all of a sudden there can be a tipping point, and that's what I'm hoping, that we're nearing a tipping point pretty soon.
Yes, exactly.
What have you learned as far as one of the things that you talk about a lot is these natural gifts that we have that can be unlocked by plants, and that they can help us in our own spiritual growth, our personal development. How do plants play that role? What's kind of going on that allows that to almost be this mirror for us in some ways?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it can be as simple as, boy, I really want to speak up about something, but I'm finding that I'm hesitant in this area. And you introduce a particular flower elixir for that, and like suddenly you feel like, wow, I have this incredible capacity to speak up. It's so much easier. It can be like that instantaneous, or it can work on a more subtle, long-term way. So my flower essence teacher, Dr. Pedro, he used to say that what flower essences are really doing is working on the cellular messaging that's in the DNA. So like in every part of every cell that we have is basically information that we store from how we grew up in as a child and from up to 6 to 8 generations back in our family lineage, right? And if you believe in past lives, you could also throw that in the mix. And so um, we think we're having these like really unique and interesting thoughts. We think we have this our own little world here, right? And no one knows what's happening there. But in fact, it's like not that unique, because I may be having a thought that I think is unique to me, but in fact, it's a regurgitation of something that my great grandmother thought, or like a patterned response, right? So the flower essences come in and they show us what, or help make more clear to us in the actual DNA and cellular makeup, which of those messagings or thought or emotional patterns really is us innately, and which have we just brought in through all of our genetic lineage. And people will say, yeah, once you hit your 30s, you have this moment where you're like, oh my God, I sound just like my mom, or I sound just like my dad. And you think it's never going to happen, and then one day it happens. And so that's like essentially, I would say, one of the most profound ways that the flower essences are operating to really help us experientially in the moment, using our own awareness, understand what is not us, and to discard that with willpower and choice, and really what is the biggest version of ourselves that we just can't even imagine how big we can be. And really pulling that out and really eliciting, like, what is the most loving, generous, kind, intelligent, brilliant, genius, courageous, brave, bold versions of ourselves that want to emerge in this world. And I've just seen it over the last 20 years. Flower elixirs, when used regularly, that's what they do. They just pull out all of our brilliance and genius, and very gently show us where we get tripped and how to, work our way out of that.
Mm-hmm. If people can start to think about, because I feel like this is where things are shifting from, even in medicine and how we view the world. It's like it's been a very biochemical dominant world for a long time. And we've learned a ton of stuff from biochemistry. And I think that it's fascinating. And that's been the whole pharmaceutical, even the whole, in many ways, even herbs and stuff have kind of been extracted to more like their biochemical properties, because I think that's made sense for us up until this point. But I think where this transition is happening now is that if we can start to think in things more in terms of like energy, frequency, vibration, light, intent, when we start to get into this world, which is really tied more to this almost this quantum physics world of how things work, I mean, it's like blows wide open as far as what is possible. So Go ahead, Katie.
I was just going to say that, and you can see that in the technology world so clearly, right? We start out with these cell phones that plug in the wall to recharge or download new systems of information. When I was in Asia last summer, I saw for the first time those recharging systems where you just like plunk down your cell phone on a surface and they recharge it. You don't even have to plug it in. So
Yeah.
if we understand this concept of downloads from technology, then it's like, oh yeah, I can kind of wrap my head around, like I go out into the forest and I see a lady slipper, not to sound woo-woo, but just like that technology language of, is there a download that I could receive from this living being that understands and is interconnected with this earth that is 4.5 billion years old? Is there some piece of information that I could sort of upgrade my system to have a better understanding?
Yeah. And such an important piece of that is first the openness and willingness to maybe play with beliefs a little bit so that you can even open the door to an experience like that. And I've mentioned this before, but I remember doing a workshop with Greg Braden a while back, and he was talking. I just mentioned this in a recent episode because I just think it's so poignant at this point in time. But he was saying, don't be so quick to give away your humanness, because pretty much everything that we experience with technology, the human is actually capable of doing on its own. But it's almost like a bit of a shortcut because technology can just make it so easy. But even like these ideas of, communicating to people across the planet, and we know this through different experimentation, that there is, this sort of non-local ability around stuff. But even with this concept of being able to communicate, it's like if you think about things from a frequency and you dial into the frequency of what that plant is, you will start to hear it. And you will see that so much more clearly when you watch how kids interact with stuff, because they haven't been conditioned to believe things in a certain way that's true or false. They live by intuition in many ways. So, I mean, I'll watch my kids and they'll have a conversation with a rock, or they'll have a conversation with a tree or a plant or something. And they're both gravitated to different types of things too, not always the same stuff. And now, like, after we're done this, we're going to take them out to the forest and we're going to pick flowers. And I want to actually do the whole process with them and see which ones they gravitate towards, because after going through it, I was going through all of this with my wife, and we're going to go take them out and do this sort of process. But if you can think about things from more of a vibration and frequency sense, it really opens your doors to thinking so much more is possible. And that's going to, I think it's already there, but it's going to come down the chain more and more. It's going to be part of normal life, I think, to start to think like that over this next little while.
Absolutely.
Now, tell me about how plants are psychic, because I came across this study a long time back too, and I thought it was fascinating, but I want you to share it with us because it just, again, it's part of this that I think is really important. One of my goals with the podcast is to kind of expand people's concepts of what they think they know, right? It's like keep expanding your box and just be open to different experiences, because then we allow them in if we do. And I thought this was a really fascinating part of it too.
Yeah. Okay. So it started out with Cleve Baxter. He is a polygraph specialist in the CIA. So he is like, at his time, was like the number one guy in teaching other CIA agents on how to use this lie detector machine. And I mean, you could just imagine what kind of guy is like sitting in his office, and one day he's like, I wonder what would happen if I connected my lie detector machine to a plant that I have in my office. Like
Yeah.
that took a little bit of like genuine curiosity, right? So anyway, so he hooked up his polygraph to the plant, and he did a series of experiments, and the guy just like did so many interesting things with plants after that point. And I'll just share two. One is he thought, well, what would happen if I, and the plant's connected, if I like struck a match and started lighting the plant on fire? In that very moment that he had the thought about doing it, he didn't even do it. He just had a thought about doing it. The plant started to freak out on the machine. The energetic, information, skin galvanic response. You could go on and on about this actual science about how it actually works, but the plant essentially started freaking out. And then he felt like, oh my God, like this plant hears my mind. It's psychic. It knows my intentions. I feel terrible. And he couldn't even do it. He couldn't bring himself to do the experiment because he knew that this was a sentient being. The other really cool experiment that he did, well, there's so many, but the one that I thought was fascinating was ultimately his conclusion was that plants can identify the murderer in the room. So he did this experiment where there were several plants in a room, and he would have people walk through, and one of the people that was walking through the room would, crumple up and destroy one of the plants. And later, you can imagine, it's like you see in the movies, you line them all up and you got to choose which one. On the actual polygraph machine, the plants, when that person who came in who was destructive and with malintent walked in the room, they started to freak out on the polygraph machine and effectively pointed the finger at who it was that was destructive. And then one more I'll share is it actually, speaking of non-local, one of his colleagues who was in the same office traveled a bunch of miles to another state, and it was his birthday party. And so what Cleve did is he had these polygraphs attached to the plants like nonstop, 24/7, right? And it was his colleague's birthday, and somebody had done a surprise birthday party. So the moment that his colleague, miles away, hits this, somebody's house, and they all jump out and yell, "Surprise!" and he feels that, positive stress response in his own nervous system. His colleague's plant in his office also started to register a stress on the machine. So then that tells us that the plants that we're in constant communication with and have a relationship with feel us at all times, no matter where we are and how far away we are. It's like mind-blowing, right?
Mm-hmm. It's like there's so much that goes on that, I mean, I really feel like we know this infinitesimal amount. And then most of the time, even when we think we totally know what it is, we realize that it's actually much more than what we thought it was. And then we have to sort of expand more too. And you had actually sent some of your flower elixirs to, I believe, to Dr. Emoto's lab and stuff. That's really fascinating. And I want you to explain what that work is. But I remember when I first came across Dr. Emoto's work, like, gosh, that must have been like 25 years ago or something. And that was one of those really, really big, like mind-blowing aha moments that I feel like really changed the direction of my life. Because it was one of those things where it was just like, are you kidding me? All of these things can actually have this effect on water, right? Which we're mostly water. And so it was such a one of those just smack in the face kind of profound moments where it's like, wow. So I thought that was fascinating that you sent them some of your work and you actually have some of the crystals around that. That's beautiful. So maybe share that story a little bit and what Dr. Emoto's work is and how that relates with yours.
Yeah, so if the listeners aren't familiar with his work yet, he took high-speed photography of water right at its freezing point. And what he found was that based on the different influences, the water would take different shapes or forms. It started out with something really simple like, writing words on a jar of water. I hate you versus I love you, for example, and found that where he put the negative words, the water just didn't even take shape. It's almost disturbing to look at the images where it's negative. It just kind of it makes you feel weird. And where the positive words are like I love you, he found that the water would take shape or crystalline form in these beautiful snowflake-like patterns. And then he just did a ton of different experiments around music and water from different areas around the world. And I mean, frankly, we just got curious. I ran into Dr. Emoto once in an elevator, like literally ran into him in an elevator. I felt so lucky to be able to spend some time with him before he passed. And eventually we sent in a few samples of our flower essence blend because I was curious, how are these incredibly beautiful flowers registering themselves in the water? And then they sent back photographs, which is really fascinating. Rustum Roy also did some really interesting research with water, and he found that on every cluster of water, there are 440,000 information panels. So if people are like, okay, but how are you actually storing, I get the flowers make us feel all good and stuff, but how do you actually get that into water? And it's like, the olden days when we use cassette tapes, like that magnetic tape, how the heck do they get music in there? Or like a CD or a DVD?
Right.
I don't really know how that works.
Yeah.
But water has the same technology where it's storing information in these panels in the water clusters. And Dr. Emoto was onto that, but just in a sort of like beautiful visual way that he could show that all of this positivity and nuance and complexity could be stored in water. And then when we introduce it into the waters of our own body, like you said, 70% water, or the brain is 95% water, we entrain or match our resonance to that.
Yeah. And again, it's like if you can think of things in terms of frequency and vibration. And I remember how, and one of my other teachers, Dr. Amit Goswami, he's a quantum physicist, and he will talk about it from a very top-down model of how everything works. So it's really from the abstract to the concrete. So when you think about things like this, you're working in this more abstract area of vibration and frequency. So he would talk about it as, from like spirit and these archetypes, and then mind, and then this vitality body of emotions and feelings. And then eventually this all trickles down to the physical body, which is where we then would see some of these physical changes in biochemistry and neurotransmitters and hormones and all these different things. But it starts higher up. So when we affect things at that point, it just trickles down and eventually gets to the physical body. And it's such, if anything, I think it's like that's the more powerful first place where everything starts from. So you can use things like plant medicine or water, or I think particularly like the work that you're doing is definitely more in that vital body layer of where I think it really has its sort of impact, and then that subtly comes down and quite profoundly can still change physical body. So
Oh,
it's
yeah, absolutely. My flower essence teacher used to say that in the vibrational medicine world, we would see, like if you think of a projector and a screen, if you see something on the image, you're not going to go scrub it off the screen. You would go back to the projector, take off the piece of dust, whatever that is. And in the case of human beings, that all of that, what you're talking about, the energetic body is instructing and informing how the physical body is made up. And it's like if we don't get something in the emotional, the mental, the energetic, if we still don't get it, then it manifests itself as a physical imbalance and a red flag of, okay, hey, this is something we really need to deal with. And in essence, that means that when we work with these types of remedies, it's a massive preventative. Like you won't even get the kind of things that you would normally get because you're just going to nip it at the bud in these other realms.
Mhm. Well, and it sounds like when you incorporate flower elixirs like you're doing, that and even the process, like I mean, people have to go and check out your book because it's a bit of a workbook as well, right? Like you're explaining things, but it's like it's an experience, and part of it is you're really bridging using the flower elixirs as this sort of support for some of the internal questions that people are asking and bringing up as an awareness, and then you're supporting the process. And it's almost like the elixirs are creating a certain frequency that is allowing you to dissolve some of those densities that have been built up, or to shine lights on the patterns that have maybe not been working for you, or the direction that maybe you need to go in. So you've almost got like this powerful little support that's just there guiding you and letting you come to it yourself, which I think is such a beautiful process.
And if anyone is not familiar with flower remedies, I should say that there's three major types of plant medicine. There are, like, I tend to think of it as the body of a plant heals our body. So like you're looking at the roots, the leaves, the stems, the flowers, something that we're commonly using in herbal medicine or when you drink a tea to go to bed at night. Whereas aromatherapy is more like the immune system of a plant. That's like literally the juice, the blood, and it's helping us, boost our circulation and our immune system. And then we come to the flower remedies, which is in essence like the consciousness or the mind or the heart of a plant, which then works on our consciousness level.
That's a really nice way to break it down. And it makes sense that I think in nature, nothing's wasted. So it's like everything has its purpose. It's like it cracks me up even when we think in like genetics and we think, oh, we've got all of this junk DNA. And it's like, probably not. Probably not. It's probably for something. Maybe we just don't know quite yet, but I wouldn't be so keen on getting rid of it yet. So But I love that. So yeah, and I think probably the ones that I'm most familiar with from before would be like some of the Bach flower remedies. If people are familiar with those, would those be along the same lines? Then it's just that Dr. Bach kind of found his group of 30 some odd remedies that really resonated with him.
Yeah, I mean, he was genius because he was the first person to figure out how to scale it. We see across, the Himalayas, yogis were consuming the essence of plants and flowers to keep them going in their meditation retreats. We see Aborigines drinking the dewdrops from the top of bush lollies. Even in the 15th, 16th centuries in Europe, we would see alchemists and doctors prescribing their patients to go out into the wild, look for specific flowers, and drink the dewdrops from the top. But it wasn't until Dr. Bach figured out how to scale it, right? So that, in Arizona where I live, we don't really have dew, it's too dry. So this is a way to be able to bring that into our daily lives. And essentially, we're doing the exact same solar infusion method that Dr. Bach used in the 30s and 40s. I would consider his remedies timeless, and then our remedies are timely. So it's
Hmm.
like, what new things have emerged? We didn't have cell phones and computers in Dr. Bach's days. So as the humanity changes, this living, breathing uh, planet is also changing and creating new remedies for things. So it's like looking out and seeking what the timely essences are that we need for things that are rising today.
Yeah, it's so true. I very much like I think in homeopathy, there's polycrests that are kind of used for lots of key things, but you're getting new remedies all the time because the world keeps changing and evolving. We're inundated with different things that we need to find solutions for. So, what is the process to extract the essence from the flower? Because I know when I'm using, say, herbal medicine, we have a certain process to be able to extract what is considered some of the juice of the herbs that we're using for certain medicinal action. How do you do that with flowers?
It's called the solar infusion process. So very different from maceration, where you're soaking it and extracting it, or like in essential oils, you're doing this very complex process of hot and cold to extract the oils. The solar infusion is very simple, and it comes really more down to, I would say, the power of the remedies really relies on the profoundness or depth of the aspiration of the practitioner or who's making them. The actual process is super simple. Solar infusion sounds very complex, but literally it's going out into the wild in an area where there aren't any chemicals, finding flowers that are right at their full bloom point. Some practitioners look at phases of the moon or planetary aspects. I find that plants are particularly active more around times of full moon and new moon. So generally that's when we are collecting. And then literally it's soaking the flowers in water for a period of time in the sun if they're day blooming flowers, in the nighttime if they're moon night blooming flowers, and then removing those flowers. And then you go through the process of adding alcohol to preserve it and stabilize it, and then the dilution process, which is very similar to homeopathy. So by the end, you have a remedy after you go through all the dilutions that even people who are severely allergic, or even poisonous flowers, similar to the process of homeopathy, that you can gain the benefit of that plant.
Mhm.
And there are actually no chemical constituents or biochemical parts in the remedy left.
Yeah, it's one of the things I really like about remedies like flower elixirs and homeopathy too, is that for the most part, they're pretty safe from having reactions to. Not that that might not stir certain things up if it's completely the wrong remedy for the person, but it's not the same as taking like a medication that you're not supposed to have or taking too high of a dose of it or something. One thing that you talk about in your book too is just sort of how do you infuse the Earth's life force into their drinking water? Because I think this is a really fun one for people to experiment with it. I mean, it's something you can do at home at any time and just see what it feels like.
Yeah. Okay. So you can take like a mason jar, let's say, and fill it up with water, and then place it outside on the ground, like right in the dirt, right on the ground. You may want to put the top on or the lid of the jar on so that no bugs crawl inside, and then leave it there overnight. In the morning, drink that water. You'll likely notice that it feels different. It's like you have more of an urge to drink it. It's more silky. There's something about it that just feels good to the body. And then I would just recommend doing an experiment. What if you do that every day for the next 30 days and just notice the kinds of, I won't give it away, but just notice what you feel when you do that.
Yeah. Well, and I won't get into it here, but it's like that. I think that ties into this concept of this fourth phase of water. And there's a book written on that too, where they kind of break down what that even means and how it's very different. And it comes from plants. And when you do practices like this, you are changing the structure of water in some ways, and it has different benefits for you. So I think it's a really neat one. I'll give that one as a surprise. Write us in and let us know how that goes. But yeah, it is different, and you will notice some differences. Are you finding any remedies, particularly now, given just the challenges that the planet is having in so many regards? And I mean, I would say the things that I see lots of, just like lots of anxiety, lots of frustration, lots of division, a lot of these types of things. Are there certain plants, certain flowers that you are finding are really stepping up as far as like these are important ones that we're needing at this time?
Yeah, stepping up is a good word. We actually had a totally random flower sprout and bloom right in front of our building that is not native to this area, um, and and it started to bloom in March of this year. So I was like, what? So I wanted to pay attention to it, and then we did some research and figured out that it actually is the crown flower, and crown in Spanish is corona. So then I was like
Wow.
totally blown away. Like, how on earth did this random tropical plant end up in the desert and literally grow? We have this building called Self-Rising Nature Center. Right where it says nature is this wild looking. I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. So I ended up making a flower essence of it and found that it's really good for going very deep and dissolving any sort of latent or hidden fears that we have. It's like stripping away any fears, any wild fears that we have so that we can attain our wildest dreams. And it also softens dualism, right? We're seeing so much, like you said, division and extreme. It's black and white, it's good, it's wrong, it's, you know, and that's really what divides us. And so it helps soften the dualism. There's another flower here in the desert called Datura. It's a moonflower. It's actually highly poisonous, but in the flower essence form, it's also really good for dissolving fears and anxieties and anger. Um, and then I found that there are a couple flower essences like for speaking your truth or experiencing courage or conviction or being able to really tune into your intuition and figure out what's right for you versus the narrative and the mainstream media and what everybody's telling you should experience. Um, and then also flowers that I'm seeing pop up a lot now for compassion, intimacy, curiosity. Some of these flowers are coming from Southeast Asia and from Iceland that are really encouraging us to bridge the gap of the fear and dualism into interconnectedness and being curious about like, well, what are you thinking and where do we connect and where are we actually on the same page?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Where do we overlap rather than where are we separate?
right, exactly.
What is the process then? Maybe walk us through if you were, because I imagine all of this, and I'll direct everybody where they can actually look and find these. But when someone is doing that, what's the process? How do you take the elixirs? What's sort of the process to be able to get what we're wanting to be able to get from them?
So easy. So I mean, if you're interested in knowing more information, there's tons of education and on our blog. Our website is lotusway.com. So it's lotus like the flower and then wei.com. But the process is so easy. It's, little drops in a bottle. So essentially you have a dropper bottle. It's got water, alcohol, and we add honey to make it yummy. And literally you just put 5 drops in your mouth 5 times a day, or I've really just gotten the habit of putting it in every glass of water, coffee, tea. And literally that's it. Like, you don't even have to believe they're going to do anything. You could think I'm totally bonkers crazy and give it about 3 to 5 days. And you just suddenly you're like, I wonder if that's it. Like, I feel suddenly you hear the birds chirping and you're like, how come I didn't hear the birds singing yesterday or any of the days before? And the sort of edginess of life softens.
Hmm.
And then you just start seeing things about yourself in a different way, really gently. So yeah, it's literally that easy.
Yeah, it's such a neat experience because and again it's like you just need to kind of have experience. I think we're conditioned to think that things have to be really big and powerful and pull out the big guns and kill things or totally change chemistry around. Like we have to kind of do it for you because you're not totally capable of doing it yourself. So we've kind of been brought up thinking like that in so many ways. And what's very nice about this is that it is their gentle process. And again, when you think about things from more of an energetic, from a frequency vibration base, it's almost like you entrain to the frequency of the flower. And then from entraining to that, it's like your feelers that interact with the world around you are different. You're going to start to notice things that you didn't notice before at a different frequency. It's no different than I think when people get when say the lens that we view the world is. So if I'm in a lens of fear, then I'm going to see a fearful world around me. And that's just how I see it. Everything I see, I'm a little bit worried. I'm focusing on what I need to protect myself from. And that's just how I see it. And that is literally the truth when you're in that field. But, think about how quickly, if you like then all of a sudden like fell head over heels in love or something, all of a sudden your world is very different. You see a very different world, even though it's the same world there. I'm extracting from it different aspects of what now I resonate with. And I feel like that's kind of what happens when you incorporate these subtle energetic therapies like this, is that they just start to show you another perspective. And in the process of showing you that perspective, you start to heal old ones. And sometimes you just can't change certain things until you genuinely see it from another perspective. And that's what it does. It opens your eyes in another way. It opens your feeling sense in a different way. And then it's not so easy to go back to the old again.
Yeah, there is something called the collective consciousness. I mean, that there I've seen, this year has been so apparent to me. Like there is this thing that we can't see called the collective consciousness that we can plug into. And you feel it when you go into different countries. You feel that essence of a place. And I used to look at flowers like red clover. That's one of the main flowers for helping you unplug from mass kind of fear and hysteria. But now that I'm seeing actually all flower essences have that quality. We have this group called the FlowerEvolution where people are taking different elixirs each month. And one thing I noticed this year is when we would get together and talk about what are you experiencing, every single person who is taking flower essences regularly did not experience any fear this year. Like with the entirety of everything going on, and the different messaging from media, people would say things like, yeah, it just kind of seemed like a theater, or it seemed like things were on stage, or I just didn't feel plugged into that. Like I just didn't have that
Mhm.
experience. And so how wonderful that we can unplug from that and really plug into our own sense of wisdom and intuition and the earth, and know that ultimately things are okay.
Well, and that segues into what I was talking about at the very beginning. Was one of the episodes that I watched on your podcast. I think it was back in maybe June, and you did one on trusting your inner authority, and you were talking about the flower elixir running iris. And then I think you had gone through about like you were doing sort of an experiment over a case of like 3 or 4 weeks of taking it fairly regularly. And this idea of trusting our inner authority, this is something I've talked about a little bit in other ways, but when I was listening to that, I like, that's such an important message right now because, and the end part that you said on that was, and I might not be getting this right, but this is how I was interpreting it, was what does it feel like to trust yourself? Or what does it feel like to have that inner knowing? And I feel like this is a question we all need to ask ourselves. And I sat with that for a little while when you had mentioned that. And I started thinking, like, what does it feel like when I know something? And I want to share with you what came up for me because it really was profound for me. And so it actually separated things. I was thinking, sometimes I feel like I know something from an intellectual way, and sometimes I feel like I know something from a visceral experiential way, and they feel very, very different. So I'll give this example. for me, a very personal one was around parenting. Before I had kids, I felt like I knew based on what I had read, on experiences I had, courses I had taken, on kind of what it was like to be a parent, and particularly when I was prescribing nutritional advice for parents for their kids that were, say, picky eaters. And from my intellectual knowing, had a feeling, if I'm being totally honest with it, of like, I'm right, you're maybe not so right, or maybe even wrong, or just don't know. A little bit more probably a superiority, like I was in the know and you just weren't, or I had more information. And if anything, I think it even could create a bit of a division of like, I'm in this camp, and if you don't really follow that, you're kind of over in this camp. And so I was thinking, so it was interesting. That was sort of my intellectual knowingness, or like if I've read enough papers to understand and I know something, but that somebody else thinks something different, that creates a bit of a separation. When I became a parent, and first I have a 16-year-old stepson, and when he came into my life, he was 7. He was an extraordinarily picky eater. When I had the knowingness of what it was like to actually live an experience of having a child that was a very picky eater, my experience of knowing was very different. It was completely humbling. I felt very, I had so much compassion for other parents. And I actually felt completely interconnected to other parents, whereas before it was very different. And it was just completely an experience. So it was a really neat exercise for me to just think about that, because what I feel is so important right now is I'm imploring people to spend time in nature when you can, to disconnect from what we are being told is what we are supposed to know, to question whether we do know it or don't know it, and then to actually try and get a visceral sense of what actually is my own knowingness. And it's so different, and you don't really know unless you kind of disconnect a bit, because I feel like when we're in the thralls of just being inundated with other people's knowing and other people's information on what we're supposed to experience and feel like and what's right and what's wrong, it's almost impossible to connect. You have to kind of separate. So like I was telling you earlier before we started the podcast, like we literally completely disconnected, and we did not look into TV. We don't even have a TV anymore. We didn't look into anything. We spent months of just now spending time on our own, connecting to nature, going for walks in the parks, spending time in the trees with our kids. And literally, it's like you start to connect to just what feels, what your truth is. And when it's your truth, or at least when it was my truth, it feels interconnected, it feels soft, it feels compassionate, and it feels humbling.
Bingo.
So thank you for that, because it was a really nice gift for me to go through that process and really kind of own those different experiences.
Can I ask you something? Close your eyes for a sec and go back to your childhood and think of any time you were playing in nature. And what's the first flower that comes to mind? And then 3 words to describe its personality. And then whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and let me think.
I grew up in the Okanagan Valley, which is like Kelowna, Penticton area. It's a really, really pretty area. And the first experience I had was going into our garden in our backyard, and my mom had these massive sunflowers, massive sunflowers. And I remember those, and it would be this, the feeling that I would get from those would be this feeling of joy, this feeling of playfulness, and this feeling of like exuberance, like kind of like abundance, like there's just, it's big, that type of a feeling. And the other one that came to me at the same time was walking through the pine forests and that sort of thing. And that's a very different feeling, but that one would be more like this sort of feeling of like being in awe a little bit, and hugely expansive and powerful. And being in the forest, just interconnected. those are the feelings that come up for me around those. And those would be the two ones that probably jump out at me most right off the bat.
Because what we find is that how you describe the flowers from childhood describe how you bring your greatest gifts into the world. So with joy and playfulness, exuberance, abundance, awe, hugely expansive and powerful and interconnected. And I think, based on our conversation, that's all coming through from your work and how you relate to the world.
Nice. And I'm going to have to pick those up then. Support that process even more.
And then another really fun one you and your listeners can do is like, what's a flower that you think is super cool today? Just like something, anything. You don't even have to have seen it. What's something that comes to mind that's just like super interesting? A flower. A tree.
Or a tree. The first one that pops to my mind is we were in Bali, and it was what are they? They're like the I can't remember the name of them, but they're like the massive trees that the monkeys all swing on.
Oh wow. Like banyan tree?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Really big. They've got these long kind of vines and everything. It's kind of like playful flexibility, wavy, because we'd see the monkeys playing on them all the time.
That's interesting. Okay, because the today flower is usually about qualities inside of yourself that you're working on bringing to the forefront more. So like you would probably be able to best interpret that like bigness, if that's like your career or your impact. And then the playful flexibility with the monkeys is if it's like your little ones, your children, like creating this giant atmosphere so that people can come in and play and experience movement and flexibility. Does that resonate?
That's really neat, because my wife and I, a couple of years back, put together a platform called Adventures in Joy. And the whole idea is around letting joy be your compass for living, where I feel like it's been on the back burner forever. So it's like part of our process over these last couple of years has really been focusing on what brings joy. Not do we think we need to do, what do we have to do, but it's like let that really, and then actually act based out of joy. So, and that has allowed us to be very flexible, more playful with things, because playfulness and joy are all part and parcel, and flexibility, I think. Otherwise, you keep missing it if you're not flexible. So that's neat. I love it.
So now
Wonderful.
You can go into the woods with your kiddos and ask them what they're drawn to and to like describe it to you. And that could really open up some interesting conversations, right?
Well, we're going to go play with that later today here. So I'll let you know what they find. Katie, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Where can we send people? And I know you mentioned Lotus Way, but maybe just let's break it down again, and then I'll put all of that in the show notes for links for everybody. Also, if people can go watch that introductory video you have to the FlowerEvolution book, it's beautiful. It really is. My wife and I were watching that, and we both kind of looked at each other, and we're both getting a little bit welled up just watching it. So it's like whenever that happens, I think you definitely put together a really nice piece, and you got your heart into what your message is about, and it came across very well in the book, or very well in the video.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so online we're Lotus, like the flower, WEI.com. We're on all the social media channels. You can find the book FlowerEvolution if you really want to deep dive, and the podcast.
Wonderful. I will link all of those on there, and yeah, I look forward to connecting again soon.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.